This is a presentation on the city's proposed amendments to the open space zoning regulations. My name is Vaidila Satvika, and I am a staff member with the Department of Planning and Urban Design. What is open space? In Asheville's zoning code, open space refers to land that is set aside for certain residential and commercial developments. This development standard aims to support a resilient and livable city by providing open spaces in the outdoors for recreation and appreciation of nature for residents, employees, or customers of private development. The zoning requirements for open space provide open spaces that differ from city parks, which are shared public property. Asheville parks also provide open spaces, but these areas are different from the zoning standards for open space, which is for private developments. In total, Asheville maintains 54 public parks that provide about 18 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents, nearly double the National Parks and Recreation Association target. To learn more about planning related to city parks, you can visit the city's Department of Parks and Recreation website. We can think of open space zoning standards for private developments as falling into two primary categories: recreational and natural. Recreational open space may include active spaces that support physical activity such as swimming pools, playgrounds, sports courts, dog parks, and community gardens, or passive open spaces that provide places to enjoy the outdoors with little physical activity, such as seating areas, outdoor dining areas, and rooftop terraces. Natural open spaces can also be provided by development projects and are intended to be experienced in their natural wild state, but may include minimal improvements such as seating or unpaved paths. These open spaces can include naturally occurring resources such as open water, streams, riparian areas, wetlands, forested areas, tree canopy preservation areas, aquatic buffers, floodplains, and designated steep slope areas. Which properties are required to provide open space? In Asheville, any residential project that includes 8 or more housing units is required to provide open space for the project. This could be applied to a residential subdivision of 8 or more parcels of land, or to an apartment building with 8 or more units. Most commercial projects are also required to provide open space to allow for customers and employees to enjoy the outdoors. Asheville stands out in this area as most cities in North Carolina do not require open space for commercial development. So what are the standard requirements for open space? First, let's review the open space requirements for residential development. This chart shows how Asheville compares to other North Carolina cities. On the left side of the chart, you will see the percentage requirement for open space, and on the bottom, the various cities in North Carolina. The blue bars represent the low end, and the red bars represent the high end of open space requirements as a percentage of any development parcel. On the far right, you can see two different standards for Asheville, which shows the current standard, today, versus the proposed code. The first thing to note is that most cities allow for a minimum of about 5% open space. This demonstrates that there is at least some agreement around minimum standards for open space across cities. The second thing to note is that the higher limit in Asheville's current regulations, which is outlined here in a darker line, is significantly higher than all other cities. This is a key limiting factor for small-scale infill housing. To see what this means in the real world, let's take a look at an actual property. This example is a 1930s 20-unit apartment building on a 3rd-acre parcel just north of downtown. On the left is an aerial view of the parcel outlined in black. The white shape represents the building footprint. The image to the right shows the 3.5-story building from the street. This structure was built before open space regulations were first adopted in 1997. But if current open space regulations had been applied, what would the result be? The image on the left highlights the amount of land required for open space under the current standards. This equates to over 3/4 of the property. This project could not be built under the current standards. The image to the right shows the amount of land required for open space under the proposed standards, which is between 10 to 15% depending on the quality of open space provided. The proposed open space regulations allow for the quantity of open space to be reduced for any project when certain design elements are met. Let's look at those design elements now. The proposed open space standards include an incentive for better design. Residential or commercial projects that comply with these 4 design standards are able to reduce the total amount of required open space by 5%. The 4 standards are that 70% of open space is contiguous, that the spaces are generally rectangular in shape, that 50% of open space is at a 5% slope or less, and that seating is provided at a rate of 1 linear foot of seating per 250 square feet of open space. This incentive will help to make open spaces more people-friendly without impacting projects that are unable to meet these higher standards. These images demonstrate the expected outcome from open spaces designed with a more pedestrian-oriented intention. Note that these spaces tend to have a lot of shrubs and trees, but they may have hardscape surfaces as well. Trees are not required in any designated open space. In fact, trees are regulated by Asheville's Tree Canopy Preservation Ordinance, which is a separate minimum requirement for all development projects. Though in many cases, trees can be preserved and integrated into the design of open spaces. Now let's look at open space requirements for commercial development. Asheville's standard for open space varies between 5 to 15% depending on the type of development. Under the proposed code, the range varies from 5 to 50%. This higher range is important to explain, as it was created in order to incentivize stormwater compliance. Let's take a look at how that works. This slide shows how open space can work as a stormwater management incentive. For projects on parcels that are 1 acre in size or larger, see the highlighted cells, 50% of the project site must be set aside as open space unless the project incorporates city stormwater management measures, which in some cases are not required. Projects that integrate stormwater management control measures may reduce their open space requirements to the lower amounts shown in the chart. This part of the code operates primarily as an incentive because the goal is to encourage projects to integrate stormwater management measures and to thereby take the open space reduction from 50% to much lower levels. This can be thought of as a strong stormwater management incentive. To say a little more about why this stormwater incentive was integrated into the open space code, we need to understand that the city's stormwater code is limited by state statute. Under current regulations limited by the state of North Carolina, large impervious sites like the image shown here will never treat their share of stormwater that contributes to nuisance flooding. And yet, Asheville faces significant environmental challenges related to climate change. Stormwater challenges have been identified in the city's comprehensive plan, as well as most recently through a stormwater task force. To respond to these needs, we have developed a creative open space code that incentivizes development toward stormwater best practices that in the long run we believe will help to mitigate nuisance flooding. Now let's review the recent history on open space. In February 2021, the city created the Open Space Task Force, a group made up of representatives from 8 different boards and commissions, including the Asheville Area Riverfront Redevelopment Commission, the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, the Development Customers Advisory Group, the Downtown Commission, the Neighborhood Advisory Committee, the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Sustainable Advisory Committee on Energy and the Environment, and the Urban Forestry Commission. The primary goal in having these 8 groups work together to refine the open space code was to balance the various perspectives and city interests. The task force agreed upon a consensus-based decision-making process, which led to every substantive issue to be reviewed and worked through together. This process led to more time-consuming work, but ultimately a better result. In total, the Open Space Task Force met 15 times over a 9-month period. This slide shows some of the key deliverables that were negotiated through the Open Space Task Force. Open space will now be required for industrial zoning districts. The group agreed to count planted property buffers as open space if they provide pedestrian access and are less than 15% slope. The group agreed to continue the previous regulation of allowing natural areas such as stream buffers to count up to half of the designated open space as long as they provide minimal pedestrian amenities. The task force created a subcommittee to improve tree planting standards and processes in exchange for requiring new open space standards to be applied to the downtown. The idea was that since street trees function as a type of public realm enhancement, improving tree planting conditions will enhance the shared open space of the public realm. This landscaping subcommittee is currently meeting every 2 weeks and plans to begin sharing concepts formally with the public in the spring. This chart presents a summary of the open space zoning requirements and compares the current standards, which are shown in the center column, with the proposed standards shown in the right column. For residential development, the current standards are governed by the requirement of 500 square feet of open space per housing unit. That clause makes the production of smaller, more affordable housing units on smaller parcels nearly impossible, and instead encourages the creation of fewer, ultimately more expensive units. The proposed regulations provide a tiered standard so that smaller projects, which tend to be located on smaller parcels, are given more flexibility than larger projects with more than 50 housing units, which tend to have more available space. For subdivisions, the proposed code is suggesting to reduce the amount of required open space. The rationale is that homeowners in residential subdivisions have front, back, and side yards, so arguably there is less need for open space in subdivisions. The amount of required open space for commercial projects is basically the same between the current and proposed, if we assume that proposed projects integrate stormwater control measures to reduce their open space requirement. Finally, for smaller projects that aren't able or willing to provide open space, developments may pay a fee in lieu of the provision of open space that shall be used to acquire or develop recreation or open space areas. This language is the same between the current and the proposed code. Fee in lieu is only allowed for smaller projects that are required to provide less than 5,000 square feet of open space. To stay up to date with this topic, please visit the project website located under the Current Project tab on the Department of Planning and Urban Design's website. If you have any questions, suggestions, or concerns, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.